O'Reilly! Check engine light on? Take the guesswork out of your check engine light with O'Reilly Veriscan. It's free and provides a report with solutions based on over 650 million vehicle scans verified by ASE certified master technicians. And if you need help, we can recommend a shop for you. Ask for O'Reilly Veriscan today. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, this is Wayne Callan for Attitude Magazine. Today's topic, ADHD between the sheets, hasn't been addressed enough. We all know that ADHD symptoms affect how we manage money, our careers, our relationships with friends. They also affect our relationships with our partners in and outside of the bedroom. As Gina Pera, author of Is It You, Me, or Adult ADD says, the truth is ignorance about the critically important connection between ADHD and intimacy creates so much unnecessary hurt. Left with no other rational explanation for sexual difficulties, partners sometimes blame themselves or each other. We are very fortunate to have Ari Tuckman and Linda Roggli to discuss ADHD and intimacy. Both have worked with adults and couples in this area. They can tell us what goes on in the mind of a person with ADHD and their non-ADHD partners. Welcome, Linda and Ari.
Thank you. So it is great to be here, and especially great to be talking about this particular topic, which, as Wayne said, this is an important topic, and it tends to not get quite enough attention in the world of ADHD. So obviously, it's possible to have a happy romantic relationship without having a good sex life or even any sex life. I mean, that's certainly possible. But having said that, a good sex life adds about 20% to the happiness of a relationship. So, in other words, without having a good sex life, you're already down to basically a B minus. Before, assuming you do everything else well, you're down to a B minus. So certainly, you can live without having a good sex life, but obviously it's better to have a good sex life if it's possible to do so. So, it's interesting that sex can really be the best or the worst in the sense that having a good sex life can either be a great source of connection in the relationship and a really good way to bond and to sort of spend time together and to enjoy each other's company, or it can be this great source, by which I mean terrible source of conflict in the relationship, where it's kind of yet another place that the couple isn't getting along, where they don't feel understood, where they don't feel that their needs are being met. Sex is one of the sort of top three topics for argument. The other two are kids and money. So these are, the big three that couples argue the most about. But for couples who already have enough things to argue about, and certainly couples where there's some ADHD, especially before it's diagnosed, especially before it's really well managed, for couples who are already struggling enough, the benefits of a good sex life are just that much more important. They're just too important to not address it, because there's this great potential benefit. And if you're not making the most of it, life is going to be that much harder for you. So, obviously we all know that ADHD can affect how happy both people are in a relationship. But I think it's important to remember here that ADHD, in some ways, it really doesn't create brand new struggles for a couple, in the sense that couples where someone has ADHD, they're having the same kinds of arguments that every other couple is having. But what's different is what I kind of call the ADHD multiplier, meaning that these couples are going to have these kinds of arguments more often and probably with some greater intensity than the other couples down the street are arguing. So in some ways, ultimately when you get down to it, the problem, it's not ADHD. The problem is the anger, the guilt, and the resentment, and all the other stuff, all those other negative emotions that can be felt on both sides of the relationship. Both partners, a person with ADHD, a person without ADHD. And, these are really kind of the problem. And, of course, it's these negative emotions that are common to all struggling, conflicted relationships. Now, it's certainly true that couples that are happy with each other, couples that are doing well, that feel emotionally connected, that are kind of getting done the stuff they need to get done in a pretty efficient sort of way, those happy couples, they do tend to have more sex, generally speaking. And certainly what's also true is that sort of insufficiently managed ADHD can also reduce the satisfaction that both partners in the relationship feel about the relationship and towards each other. Unfortunately, it's one of those situations that neither nagging nor being nagged at, like neither one of those is sexy. And both of those kill sexual generosity. It's just hard to feel sexually connected or interested in someone when there's just too much kind of strife and, just running battles kind of going through the day and through the week. One of the big ways that ADHD affects a couple's sex life is just the plain and simple thing of time management, in the sense that if you're not managing time well and the day or the night kind of slips by with these other sorts of things, sex just kind of gets squeezed out, like not with any intention to avoid it. It's just kind of like it's the end of the night and everybody's tired and, well, I don't know, maybe tomorrow's the day. And it just gets squeezed out day after day. In addition to just plain old time management, one of the other ways that ADHD can affect a couple's sex life is just that people are tired, that kind of constant scrambling just to kind of do what needs to be done to manage daily obligations. That, by the time each person in the couple addresses all the daily demands, they're just kind of done, and sex is great, but they don't have the energy to really do it, or to, put in the energy to pursue their partner and to try to make something happen. So this is where Linda will take over and...
Absolutely, and here I am, ta-da, in the flesh. How about that? Let's talk a little bit about sleep, because obviously sleep and sex and ADHD kind of all mingle in there together. But remember that folks with ADHD tend to have sleep issues. Most of us tend to stay up really late. We're night owls. So if you guys aren't in bed at the same time, how are you ever going to be intimate with each other? I know I'm guilty of saying, I'll be there in 15 minutes. My husband says, yeah, 5 hours from now. But so that actually is going to reduce the amount of opportunity that you have unless you make appointments, which is something we can talk about later. Let's talk about medication, because many people ask me, well, does the medication affect my sex life? And generally speaking, stimulants do not affect your ADHD sex life, other than the fact that, except for the fact that taking a stimulant at a time before you go to bed may actually increase your focus. And there are some doctors who actually prefer to have their patients, if they're going to be intimate, they can plan it, just like birth control, for heaven's sake. On the other hand, some antidepressants can dampen sexual desire, especially the SSRIs, like Paxil and Prozac and those kind of things. So medications can affect it, but I've actually had a client who said that taking a stimulant actually made her hypersexual. So remember that it can go either direction, and it's so dependent on exactly how your ADD manifests and how you react to medication, your own metabolism. The old, I've got to have something new all the time. So remember that if you are married to an ADHD partner, he or she may really want a lot of variety in the bedroom, and they may want to do something one day that they may not want to do the next day. And if you are the ADHD partner, plain old everyday sex after sex the same old way every time may not be exciting for you. So the excitement doesn't have to be, I put on the slide here that extramarital affairs kind of fall into that impulsivity piece. But we don't have to have external and extramarital affairs to make our sex life exciting within an ADHD relationship. It just requires a little willingness and a little conformity on both sides. Touch. I know a lot of folks, this is not true for everyone, but a lot of the folks with ADHD are very, very sensitive. It's that, thing I can't stand the label on the back of my clothes and that kind of stuff. So one day, your husband or wife or partner may touch you in a certain way, and it feels, just delicious. The next day, they touch you in exactly the same spot, exactly the same way, and you just want to run away. You just want to crawl out of your skin. So that kind of variance of, it feels good one day, it feels bad the next day is so confusing to that other person out there. And yet, ADHD folks have it. It's not that you say, I'm just going to tolerate this. It actually is more to the point of communicating that. I know that this is confusing for you, but this is the way I'd like you to touch me today. So I think both Ari and I are kind of in agreement about the same, this communication piece is really difficult, and communication is often difficult for ADHD folks too. So we'll talk about that a little bit. One of the most important pieces is in any intimate relationship, whether there's ADHD involved or whether there isn't ADHD involved, is trust. You don't want to open yourself up in the most intimate, literally without your clothes on, and being completely intimate and vulnerable, actually, in that moment of intimacy, unless you can trust each other. And because of all the things that Ari mentioned, and because of some of the things that I mentioned, trust may be hard to come by. If someone's been nagging you all day, you don't want to trust them. You kind of want to stay protected in that respect. But being able to trust each other is also related to being able to trust yourself. If you are the ADHD partner, a lot of times we've let ourselves down just as much as we've let our partners down. So we may not trust that our partners are being willing and forgiving. We may not believe what they say when they say, yes, it's okay. And we may not be able to trust ourselves to perhaps keep an appointment to show up for an intimate moment. So that trust kind of has to be rebuilt in order for all of the intimacy that all of us say we crave, for that to happen in or out of an ADHD relationship, and frankly, in or out of bed. So the ADHD myth is that talking about only the ADHD, if we fix the ADHD, then everything's going to be fine. We're going to have a great sex life, our marriage or relationship is going to be wonderful. It's actually just the ADD that's preventing us from doing that. If we just have that barrier out of the way, it would all be wonderful. But the truth is, if we go on to the next slide, the secret is that addressing only the ADHD does help, but it doesn't solve all the problems. More often than not, when I talk to couples about their relationship issues, we always start with that little pinnacle of ADHD. Everybody wants to talk about that. Well, if we could just fix her, or if he would just pick up his clothes off the floor, or whatever the issue is, if I could just be happier out of bed, then I can be happier in bed. And the truth is that 99.9% of the time, as Ari said, these issues aren't ADD issues. They're regular old relationship issues, just with that little, as he called it, the multiplier effect. So if you address the ADHD on both sides, the non-ADD partner as well as the ADHD partner, you're going to have a little more emotional space. You're going to have a little bit more time, and you're going to have more trust, frankly, for sex. But then you need to use it well, as this slide says. So, Wayne, are we ready to take questions?
We are. There are plenty of them.
Great.
Very pointed ones. I'll start with a husband who says his wife is so easily distracted that in the middle of a romantic interlude, she's suddenly talking about the cat. He says, talk about a mood killer.
Yeah.
And he wants to know how he can talk to her about this to try to solve it.
Well, I guess my first thought would be, to what extent is she aware of her doing this? So my hope, of course, would be that she is aware, but I think it's plain old communication in some ways, for him to communicate to her that, this doesn't really do it for me. That when you change the subject like that, that's a bit of a mood killer for me. Just like if you touch me like this or you move like that or whatever, it doesn't work as well for me as perhaps it does for you. But to just kind of talk about it in a very neutral kind of way, and to not, and definitely do not overread the meaning of what's going on there, as in she's talking about the cat because I'm not performing well enough, or she's talking about the cat because she's, I don't know, totally self-absorbed, or, any of these kind of like extreme, highly negative, really problematic kinds of assumptions that are so easy to make. And, my guess is that, you're going to have a conversation about this and she'll say, oh, okay, I get that. And then the next time maybe it doesn't happen, but probably the time after that it does. And that it's just one of those of like, okay, back to it, or we'll talk about the cat later. Or maybe you come up with a code word, which is come on back, put that on the to-do list for later, in a very neutral kind of way, or to laugh at it in a sort of like, ha-ha, we're having fun here, laughing with each other, not at each other. Because, of course, playfulness and laughter should be an important part of a good sex life also. But to just take it as a very small kind of a thing that doesn't need to get too much read into it.
Yeah, and what you said about playfulness, I love that, Ari, because what I'm hearing, the overtone in this question is anger. because I am ticked off. And it's personal. There must be something going on with me, and she's destroying our sex life. One of the things I really liked is that Dr. Jill, when we did the entire series, ADHD Between the Sheets series, one of the things that she suggested to kind of help distraction, because we all get distracted during sex. I mean, you probably thought about the cat during sex occasionally, too. Not that you brought it up, but your mind might have wandered for a moment, too. One of the things that she did is what I'm calling the play-by-play, which is literally saying, I'm putting my hand on your shoulder, and you're putting your knee on my hand, or whatever it is, so that you literally are naming the parts, so it brings you back really, really present. Some people, and that's one game that you can play, and you could even say, okay, it's time to do the play-by-play. It's the in-bed play-by-play. So what are you doing? That immediately pulls her out of thinking about the cat and thinking about, what am I doing? Oh yeah, it brings you back into your body. It's what it does. And another way to do that is, several people have mentioned meditation, and you can actually do meditation. And the other one is, and I kind of touched on it briefly, is if your doctor agrees, you can actually look if stimulant medication is part of her treatment program. You might even look at a dose of stimulant medication on those nights that you plan ahead. And I don't know, I don't think I'm going to bring up appointments for sex, because that kind of creates reaction, because who can't be on time for appointments? But it is one way that you actually can let those things stay outside the bedroom, kind of like the cat. Maybe the cat stays outside the bedroom too. Maybe the cat's in the bed with you. Oh, that's interesting. Next question.
Robin asks, can ADHD interfere with having orgasms?
Great question. And it doesn't, and I'm going to start, if you don't mind. To our knowledge, it doesn't affect, but the distraction possibility certainly can. Because remember, ADHD is a neurotransmitter issue, and that's all about dopamine. So if sex is exciting, it actually probably causes, you're more likely to have orgasm, because it is bringing you to attention. That's why we have lots of unplanned pregnancies with ADHD, because it feels good, I want to do it now, and that is because it's stimulating those dopamine receptors and getting more dopamine out there. But in terms of orgasm, it's probably more about distraction. It's probably more about stress from the rest of the day and everything that's going on outside the bedroom, or other things that are going on in the relationship, because resentment can be a buzzkill too, let me tell you. Do you have anything to add to that, Ari? I know there's lots more to say.
No, I think actually you really sort of covered what I would have said there. So
okay,
I'll leave it at that.
Cool, great.
Wife asks, I try not to make a difficult situation worse by translating my partner's ADHD-related bedroom challenges into, you don't love me. I know that line of thinking doesn't end well, but at times I still feel offended. How can I resolve this?
Ari, what do you say?
Yeah, I think, first of all, big congratulations on not taking it personally. Because you're right. Not only does it not, to say it doesn't end well, I think is kind. I think more accurately is it ends really badly. So, and especially because I think it winds up being a lot of upset it's certainly not helpful, but it's also kind of unnecessary. So, I think that, my advice would be to just kind of talk about it directly, and probably not when you're naked in bed. Like that may not be the time to have that discussion, but to just have a very point-blank kind of direct discussion. When you do these sorts of things, it kind of turns me off, or it takes me out of the mood, or whatever. And then instead to offer some alternatives, or to come up with some plans of, if your husband does sort of unthinkingly do one of these things that you guys have talked about, okay, so then what's our plan? Like, what do I do in response? And what are you giving me permission to do in response, so that it doesn't become this thing where he sort of has this distracted, impulsive, kind of thoughtless, moment, and then it kind of blows the whole thing out of the water. So, but instead, like, what are some things that you can do to directly address it? And to keep in mind, this is probably going to be an evolving solution, in the sense that you're going to talk, you're going to come up with some stuff, you're going to try it. It'll sort of work, or it'll work really well, or it really won't work at all. And then you go back to the drawing board, you come up with some new stuff, you refine it, and away you go. So
exactly. Yeah, I agree completely. Ditto. That's exactly right. Especially the piece about talking about this outside the bedroom before you get there, because in the moment it's just going to cause resentment, and your partner, your husband or your partner, is going to feel even worse too, which then is just compounding the whole issue. That really is a multiplier.
Yeah, and if your sexual experiences are negative for one or both of you, like who wants to seek out negative experiences? As great as sex is, if it's a terrible thing, or if it's too likely to be this really kind of awful experience, then at least one of you is kind of wisely going to want to avoid it.
Jill has a question. She says, my husband, who was just diagnosed with ADHD, has always said I had to have sex with him twice daily in order for him to know that I love him. But we're married 20 years now. I'm getting tired. In fact, I don't think it's about love at all. I think it's about self-medicating. What do you think?
So the husband is the one with ADHD, right? Just diagnosed?
Yes.
Sounds like she's got a really good guess going on there. And to tie sex to if you don't have sex, you don't love me is dangerous territory. Any kind of conditional, if you do this, then I love you. I've had a client who had an experience. She was ADHD, her husband wasn't, but he tied the sex to love, and it just was disastrous for both of them because they were both unsatisfied. But as I just mentioned before, dopamine and sex go hand in hand, and it certainly could be self-medication. However, if after 20 years and you're tired, that's about conversation as well. That's about discussing, this is what I need, because what it sounds to me like is this a little lopsided. The sex life is all about what he wants instead of about what feels good for you, and how can you respond appropriately and honestly, more importantly, when you are feeling pressured that way. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, this is blackmail. Or I'm going to steal a line from Dan Savage where he says, this is not a relationship, this is a hostage situation.
Bingo.
So, to say if you don't have sex with me twice a day, then it means you don't love me, or if you don't, I don't know, whatever, then it means you don't like that. It's putting the work of him feeling good about himself onto his wife, that she needs to do X, Y, and Z in order for him to feel good about himself, rather than he needs to figure out for himself what he needs to do to feel good about himself. And, it's becoming a situation. First of all, I can't believe it took her 20 years to get here. She's clearly much more generous and patient than I think most people would be. But I don't know. I think most of us want sex to be with a willing partner who's eager to be there, as opposed to someone who feels like they're being kind of strong-armed into it. Like that's not at all interesting to most people. So I don't know exactly what is going on with him and the dynamic in the relationship, but I think absolutely there needs to be a really hard look taken at it so that both of them can be better off.
And, there's a variation of this. If you don't have sex with me X number of times a day or week or month or year or whatever it is, then you don't love me. But the variation on that is if you don't have sex with me, then I'm going to go have sex with someone else. If you don't give it to me, then someone else is going to take care of me. And that can lead to other incredibly difficult situations. And that may be a huge factor in why it's been 20 years, because there's that sense of fear in there. And fear is not a way to have a good sex life. Trust me on this. That's about going back to trust again. How can you trust if you have that kind of stuff going on? All right, Wayne.
Would it help my non-ADHD girlfriend to know that ADHD brain function can affect sexual expression? Though not in itself a solution, knowledge can at least relieve psychological pressures, hurt feelings, and unnecessary blame and shame on both sides. Moreover, knowledge paves the way to realistic problem solving.
I think you've answered your own question, right?
Yeah,
you've answered your own question. The answer is yes. We don't have to belabor that. You said that beautifully. Whoever wrote the question did a beautiful job of explaining it. I didn't mean to interrupt, Wayne.
Yeah. Well, what would be a script or a scenario that one partner might be able to explain to the other without offending him or her?
We kind of go back to communication again. We kind of go back to, first of all, how you set that up so that you can be honest and you can, sit down outside of bed Again, this has got to be in a neutral place when you're both in a pretty good place, that you aren't stressed out about work or that you don't have kids crying or whatever else is going on in the relationship. I don't know if there are children involved, but talking about this in a neutral setting is really important. And even providing, some people hand the book to the partner and say, here, read this. Not always the best solution, because there's immediate pushback from that. Why do I have to take care of you? Why should I read the book? I live with you. I know what ADD is, blah, 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 blah. It just goes on and on and on. But as you said so beautifully, education really is the way through all of this. And if this girlfriend is devoted to you and is devoted to the relationship, is committed to the relationship, then I don't think she's going to have much trouble learning about ADHD, especially if you couch it in terms of, this is what makes me tick. And remember, too, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that your brand of ADHD may not be what's in the book. There may be a few pieces that are you, but it's not you exactly. So I think the first thing to do is get clear about, how does ADHD manifest for you? How do you handle some of those issues? And then and be able to say, I'm solving some of these problems by X, Y, Z. This is what I already do. These are some coping strategies I have. These are some things that I really like to work on. And together, I think that we can include my ADHD, kind of walk down the road with it, and actually have a fabulous sex life as long as we're both on the same page about this. And by the way, what can I do for you? What's coming up for you about sex? So this is a two-way street. Does that sound right for you, Ari? Anything you got?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only thing I would add here, and you sort of touched on this, but that the girlfriend learning about your ADHD either from a book or a webinar or an article or you're explaining your own personal experience, I think it's important to be clear on this. This is not her doing you a favor. To learn about this. It's that she's doing both of you a favor, that she will be happier the better she understands this. And obviously this applies outside of the bedroom just as much as in the bedroom. But, the difference is in the bedroom, I think we tend to take things a little bit more personally. So that, her life is better. And there's that old saying, would you rather be right or happy? And, if she's kind of sticking, and I don't think she is because you didn't say this, but I'll say it for the rest of the listeners, if she's kind of sticking rigidly to this idea of, no, this is how it should be, if, you really loved me, you wouldn't get distracted during sex, or if you're really happy with our sex life, you would never, ever get distracted by anything else, or some sort of a thing. And maybe that's true for some other people, or it isn't, but let's say it is. But if it's not true for you, then it becomes this thing of like, look, honey, you can hold on to that idea. But if you hold on to it, I think you're ultimately going to be a lot less happy about things. Because if you hold on to that idea and then you read meaning into it when I get distracted or whatever, you are not going to be as happy, and this is just not going to work as well. So I think you need to create a situation where you are both coming at the relationship from equal footing, which is that this has to work for both of you. And if it isn't working for both of you, then I don't know, maybe the relationship isn't meant to be. And if you're not interested in the relationship ending, then it means that both of you perhaps have some work to do to really kind of bring your best to this discussion and to try to resolve it in a productive way that you can both feel good about. And you really don't want it to be one of those situations where as the ADHD partner, you're always on the downside and you're always trying to get back into the other person's good graces, because that is not a sustainable, or at least not a happily sustainable kind of a relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to say one quick thing, and this applies to everything we say today. ADHD isn't personal. ADHD just is, and it doesn't mean anything about you, and it doesn't mean anything about the person who loves you. You're not doing this intentionally, but when you're on the other side of an ADHD relationship, if you're not ADHD, it can sure seem personal. So you're allowed to say ouch, but what you are not allowed to do in a healthy relationship is to hold on to that resentment. It's okay to say, oh my gosh, that really hurt. I know you didn't mean it that way, but it sure felt like it to me. Let's talk about this a little bit, because I just can't get past it. Communication solves everything as long as you can get through the communication. I used to have communications with my now ex-husband, and it seemed like the more we talked, the worse it got. So having some clear communication guidelines is also really important. So that's all I wanted to insert there.
That's good advice. We have a question about inattentive ADHD. My wife with inattentive ADHD is always willing to have sex with me and seems to always enjoy it, yet she never initiates. I'm sure this isn't social or gender conditioning. She simply initiates very little in life and tends to respond to what's in front of her. How can I overcome this so she begins to initiate herself?
Oh, wow. Since I'm not inattentive and I don't deal well with inattentive, I'm going to pass this off to Ari. I'm passing the buck.
It's important to know your limits.
That's true.
I have two answers to this. On the one hand, I'll start with the answer that I don't have a lot of faith in, and then I'll give you the better answer second. So the answer I don't have a lot of faith in is to talk to her about it and say, I would really appreciate it, or it would really turn me on, or I'd feel much better, or something, if you were to initiate more. Help me understand what stops you from initiating. What can we both do to make it easier for you to initiate? And you know what? Maybe that will work. Or maybe you set it up where you do this kind of stage sort of a thing of like, okay, tonight I want you to initiate. I'm going to be home at 7, and then, and maybe you just sort of play the game. And as long as everyone's kind of having fun with it, then it works. So that's the answer I don't have a whole lot of faith in, because, given the fact that what you said is that she's not someone who's a big initiator in other parts of her life either. I don't know that this is, I'm not going to hold out big hope that you're going to somehow get to a 50-50 kind of a thing. So instead, what my advice would be is that if you're a good initiator and she's a good acceptor of your initiations, then away we go. That is the solution. That, your job is to do the initiating when it's the right time and place, to do it nicely, to do it enthusiastically. And her job is to take those initiations and those offers and to, accept them when it's the right time and place and when she can feel good about it, and to say no when she doesn't want to feel good. And as long as everyone does their job nicely, then things work out. You guys have the sex that you want to have, even if she's not going to be that big initiator that you would kind of hope her to be. But, and again, just beat a dead horse on this. Do not take it personally that she's not initiating with you, because it's like you said, it sounds like she's enjoying it when you guys are doing things. So it sounds like she's just not a big initiator on this stuff, and that's just kind of the way it is.
And, I'm not so sure that that's necessarily an inattentive issue. Actually, I know inattentive people who do initiate sex, who do, take the initiative to move forward. So I'm not sure that you can hang that on inattentive ADHD, now that I kind of thought about it for a moment. So, and I'm kind of with Ari about that. Talking to her and encouraging her may simply feel that she's under more pressure, and that may actually taint the wonderful sex life that you do have. So I know it feels like, why do I have to do all the work all the time? But the truth is, if the end result is intimacy and vulnerability and closeness and love, then who cares who initiates at some level? And I know that's kind of, I don't mean to make you wrong about this, but if you guys have a great sex life, yay for that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also important to point out there's a little bit of a nuance on this, which is that there's a person who overtly is the initiator, and then there's a person who's a little bit more covertly the initiator.
Yeah.
And you're overtly the initiator in the sense that you're the one who puts it into words or puts it into action. But my guess is that you kind of look at your wife and you get a read and you say, is this a time where an initiation is likely to pay off? Because if you can tell she is totally not in the mood, you're not going to waste your time initiating. So, the initiators are always watching the non-initiator, and it's often the non-initiator who's the one who kind of controls the frequency of sex by sending those signals of, yeah, I think I might be interested, or no, I'm not, don't bother. So, so maybe to give her a little bit of credit on that and to talk a little bit directly about it, how do I know when to initiate and when do I not initiate? And is your radar reading right, or are you misreading sometimes? And obviously, if you sort of initiate and she shoots you down, that's obvious that you misread. But the other misread is that she actually might have been interested, but you didn't think she was, and you didn't initiate, and that miss kind of goes by unnoticed. So I think that, it's helpful maybe to have some conversation about that as well.
It's a dance, isn't it? How complicated is this? That's what they call it, the dance of intimacy. Back and forth and back and forth and swirling and dancing.
One person asks about medication in ADHD. What is the impact, if any, from amphetamine-based drugs on libido? Also, are there any physiological effects from these drugs that have sexual or intimate ramifications?
Well, I will talk just a little bit about this, but I want Ari. Neither one of us, remember, are physicians. We are speaking from our own clinical experience and our own research. But from what I understand, there is not an effect from amphetamines on libido. Having said that, just as I said earlier today, there are so many different kinds of ADHD that I have a client who was taking Adderall. She was taking amphetamines, and her dose was a little too high. It was when they were still in the kind of trial period of trying to figure it out. Apparently she had a little too much, and she's very inattentive, ADHD, which is why I said I wasn't sure the initiation was an inattentive issue. She was inattentive. She was on the amphetamines, and all of a sudden she was lusting after the mailman. I mean, she was just, she said, her words were, I felt like a pirate. I was like a pirate. I was after everyone. And her poor husband, who was used to this very, small amount of sex drive, just kind of was blown away. He's like, what happened to my wife? And give her back to me. When they adjusted the medication, her sex drive came down maybe a little higher than it was previously, but it was within the realm of their norm. And again, it's about your own normative issues as well. Physiologically, amphetamines or any stimulant medication doesn't really affect sex in the way that you might think, oh, yeah, well, if it's speeding everything else up, it should speed me up too. But remember that amphetamines or any stimulant medication are about increasing focus. They're about your ability to pay attention. So that's why I said when someone said, does it affect orgasm and so forth and so on. It takes, just as we have ADHD folks have trouble sleeping, sometimes taking a stimulant before we go to bed, which sounds completely counterintuitive, but taking a stimulant there because it takes focus to quiet your brain enough to actually fall asleep. It's the same thing with orgasm. I think Dr. Ned Hallowell popularized this idea some years ago, that if you can actually focus, then you can actually pay attention to what's going on in your body. I think a lot of folks with ADHD are kind of outside their bodies. They're so in their head about, oh my gosh, I got to get that pile done and I'm late and I've got to miss this, and oh my gosh, my boss is expecting this and so forth and so on. Like, I forgot to pick the kids up at school. That it takes us a little while to kind of get down into our bodies, and therefore the second level or third or fourth or fifth level of that is, how am I feeling sexually? And that kind of goes back to the question that was asked before about initiation. It may be that someone who's inattentive or not paying attention to what's going on but may not even realize that they're kind of primed to have sex. So I kind of veered off a little bit. Ari, why don't you bring us back on track here?
Sure. Yeah, I think at normally prescribed doses, the ADHD medication should not have a significant positive or negative effect on sexual expression, other than the potential positive effect of better focus, which enables you to be more present to the situation that you're in. Now, having said that, if you're using, street amphetamines, if you're smoking them, if you're injecting them, if you're snorting them, if you're taking very high doses, that's a whole different ballgame, and obviously that can have some very significant effects on your sexual experience, as well as obviously lots and lots of other things. So, but that's really kind of an apples and oranges kind of a situation. So let's not kind of blend the two.
Okay. Another wife asks, could my ADHD husband actually be bored with sex? Is that possible?
I think anybody can be bored with sex. And, it reminds me of a line from Robin Williams where, and this was an old line, but I still remember it because I think it's just genius in that it just captures something. So, the line is where he says, I don't know what all this hoopla is about same-sex marriage, because anyone who's been married for a while knows it's all the same sex anyway. And, of course, the joke in that is that, once you've been with someone for a while, it's it's easy to lose kind of the mystery and the spark and the excitement because, you tend to do a lot of the same stuff because, I don't know, because that's sort of what we do in life. So I think that if your partner or you or both, ADHD or not, if you're feeling bored, I think it's important to address it, to sort of figure out, like, okay, what do we do to make this more interesting? How do we mix this up? And that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to be like, swinging from the chandeliers or anything. And it certainly doesn't mean that either of you should be doing anything that makes you uncomfortable or threatens a relationship or diminishes your sense of yourself or diminishes your partner in your eyes. But that there needs to be some honest discussion about what do we do to make this more interesting. Because the thing is, if one partner is, happy with how things are, it's fine, but the other is feeling bored, that's not a sustainable situation, because a partner who's feeling bored is going to start to avoid those sexual experiences, because why would they seek it out if it's kind of become boring to them? So it's a matter of being open and honest with each other, and that is a matter of responding well to it, because if, and I'm not at all suggesting this is what's going on in the person who asked the question in their relationship, but if the partner is feeling bored but feels like if they bring it up that then their partner winds up sort of freaking out or taking it personally or overreacting, there's a disincentive to bring it up, and yet sex is unsatisfying, which creates a dead sex life. So in order to have a better, more interesting, active sex life, there probably needs to be some evolution to it in terms of what you guys do and what you don't do and what you're willing to try and what you're not willing to try. But it's the same negotiation for couples for lots of other things too, which have nothing to do with sex.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, Ari, was that this, like everything else that we talked about today, it's not just in the bedroom. My guess is that there are boring things going on in the relationship outside the bedroom as well. And those things, addressing even some of those things may be important. And I don't know whether you guys have been together a long time or whether it's just a short time, but if my hunch is right and you've been together for a long time, you're going to find endless books about how to put the spark and the romance back in your relationship that has nothing to do with ADHD at all. And all of us need a little spurt of excitement here and there. I read somewhere recently that that if you allow your days to be pretty much the same day after day after day after day, life doesn't seem like when you get older, the older you get, the faster the days pass, and all of a sudden it's, what happened to 2001 kind of thing. And some research shows that if you do something different in your routine every day, that it actually kind of puts a little bookmark in there. It actually kind of slows down time. Not literally, but let's face it, it's all about how we perceive it anyway. So doing that, inserting those kind of little bookmarks and those little interesting pieces, even if you go backwards the way home instead of going the same old all the time. And the same thing applies to sex. If you can put some little sparkles in your sex, just even small things, I think it'll make a difference. Well, and if it doesn't, try again.
Well, and to invest the energy into it. I think that exactly. A lot of times when we get bored with sex or with our relationship, it's because we're just doing the same old thing and we're not investing energy in that. A happy relationship and a satisfying sex life requires energy. You got to put some time into it. You have to think about it. You need to come up with new ideas. You have to be willing to try things. And it can't be the last thing that happens in the day. And I'm going to steal this line from Marty Klein. It can't be the last thing that happens in your day when you're too tired to do anything else. It's like, well, I don't have the energy to, read emails, so I guess let's have sex, honey.
Oh, great example. I like it.
Lisa has a question about communicating your needs to an ADHD partner. It's a little complex, so bear with me.
Okay.
If I wanted to tell my ADHD partner that I would like to build more intimacy in the relationship, he might take that offensively and respond in attacks and defensiveness, because according to his perspective, he kisses and hugs me enough. However, from my perspective, he's not really there when he's kissing or hugging me. His attention always seems distant, and it's usually sandwiched between jokes or playful attacks. So how does a non-ADHD partner effectively explain the subtleties of intimacy to an ADHD partner who doesn't seem to understand the difference?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that. And I'm sure we both have something to say about this. But as far as I'm concerned, this screams communication issues. And I guarantee you this is not about intimacy in the sexual and physical sense entirely. This is about your relationship overall. So if it's sandwiched in between jokes and kind of little, nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of thing, and, oh, I love you, honey, and that kind of stuff, you're probably right. It probably is distant because he probably is a little distracted. He probably is thinking about something else. So your job and his responsibility, to be very candid with you, his responsibility to the relationship is to turn around and look you in the eyes and be with you, if to use one of my trainings, to be with you fully. But that may be very, very uncomfortable for him because vulnerability is really scary for a lot of people. It doesn't take ADD. ADD may be more prone to being distracted and pulled off track with it. But it sounds like if this is a pattern, this very well may be something it actually may be great to actually work with a therapist like Ari or somebody like that, simply because getting you guys in the same space at the same time may take a little effort than you can do on your own by reading books or by asking questions on webinars. And what I really want to validate for you is that you're not wrong for wanting what you want. I really want you to know that if you're not feeling the love, then you're not feeling the love. It just isn't there for you. And if it's true for you, it doesn't make any difference what he says. Oh, I do it enough. It's enough. But if you say it's not enough, then it's not enough. And I'm sure it works the other way, too. There may be some things in his life, I don't even know what, but there may be some things in his life that he says, no, I want more of this, and you say, no, I've given you enough. So it's really about acknowledging that what I want is really what I want. It's like somebody dismissing you for saying, well, I'm feeling really angry about that. And then someone says to you, you shouldn't feel angry about that. Why shouldn't I feel angry? It's not a question of should or shouldn't. I simply do, and you simply need more than he's giving. Now, the way through that is a little more complex, and I'll defer to our psychologist over here to see if he's got some ideas off the cuff for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to negotiation in that, Linda's absolutely right that, that it's for you to define what an intimate moment feels like. It's not for him to define it. Now, it may be that he's kissing you and hugging you as much as he needs it, and if that's the case, congratulations to him. But if it's not the thing for you, then it's not his place to say that he's giving you enough. And it's sort of, let's take a really simple, non-emotional example. It's kind of like if you like your eggs scrambled and he likes them sunny side up, it's not for him to say, sunny side up really is, that really is sufficient. If we're talking about breakfast, sunny side up is really kind of like, that'll do it. And maybe for him it does, but if you prefer to have your eggs scrambled, then there needs to be some negotiation of like, well, what are we doing for breakfast? And what are we doing today? And maybe we'll do it this way, but what about next time? Or what if we each get our eggs the way that we each want them this time? And, obviously this applies to all sorts of other sexual scenarios, all sorts of non-sexual scenarios, that there needs to be some negotiation of how do we do this and how do we make sure that we're both happy. And that begins with perhaps you need to have some sense for you of what it is that you need. Because if you don't really know, you can't really expect your partner to figure it out. But to then, talk it through and have that discussion and the negotiation. And sometimes in relationships, we do things for each other that we don't really understand. So like my classic example is my wife has this thing about having the blinds closed in our our TV room is in the front of the house. It's easy to see from the street. As far as I'm concerned, we're sitting and watching TV, so I don't care who's watching because there ain't nothing to be seen. My wife has a thing. She wants them closed. I don't get it. I don't care about having them closed when I'm by myself, but if she's there, often, not always, often I will be the one, I'll get up and I'll close them because I know that she's going to be happier about it. These are the things that we do for each other. I don't need to understand her need for closed blinds, but that's fine. I know that she wants it. That's all I need to know. And if I'm feeling generous, I'm willing to do it. And if I expect her to be generous with me, it would be wise for me to be willing to do it.
Absolutely. And I just want to add one final thing to that, because it reminded me when you talked about the blinds, and another example you said was that if I can't remember if it's a husband or boyfriend, but if this significant other of yours actually does make moves to come your direction and actually does give you some hugs and kisses that do feel genuine to you, acknowledge it. Because remember, what you focus on expands, and what you acknowledge, you get more of. So be sure that you say, wow, that really felt good. Thank you for that. I know you're really trying, because, and I noticed it really felt different and it felt good, and I feel closer to you. That's going to put that in place, and it's going to ensure that he knows, number one, that he's doing it better and he's doing it right, if you will, and it also will allow you to notice, because too many times I've heard couples say, well, of course he's doing it, he should have done it all along. That's not going to reinforce it. It's just like, well, of course you should do this. You owe me that. No, that's not what's going to work in a relationship. What's going to work is mutual acknowledgement. And even if you say that to your guy, he may say, well, I was really trying and it didn't feel very good to me. And he can acknowledge that it didn't feel great to him either. I thought it was too much, but I'm glad it worked for you. You know, again, this is all about making sure that about honesty 100% of the time, which is a little scary for a lot of people. So, all right, we've beaten that to death, I think.
What about women and hypersensitivities? A woman writes in, she says she loves her partner, but she does find his touch irritating or painful. Is there a therapy or a way to deal with this? An occupational therapist, or what would be a solution to this for her?
Desensitization. I don't know anything about that. Do you know anybody, any special techniques for that, Ari?
You know what? I don't, other than, you know, again, that communication thing of really kind of working together and I don't know, it's trying to identify what feels good, what doesn't, if something he's doing doesn't feel good, to tell him and for him to very quickly switch without taking it personally to something else, or to show him, or that, you know, it's just a need for good communication.
Well, and the other thing about this, too, is, and I know we really haven't touched on this yet, but and that was an interesting choice of words, Linda, but let's talk about masturbation for a moment here. What feels good when you touch yourself? Is it painful when you touch certain parts of your body? And if it isn't, maybe you can show your partner exactly how they can do it, or maybe you do it and they watch, or maybe you use, you know, sex toys, or maybe there's something else out there. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but I do want to make sure that we have to know our own bodies first. That's the absolute first thing. So it's okay to see, does it feel good to have somebody touch my shoulder, or do I not like it? Do I like to have somebody grab the back of my neck and kiss me passionately, or do I really kind of feel like I'm being, smothered by that? And you know, everything below the waist as well is the same kind of thing. So if you can explore your own body, if you are sexual and you're able to orgasm by yourself, then that can open the door to the same kind of touch or similar touch with your partner. So be sure that, I don't want you to feel badly that, because there could be some shame involved in that. Oh, I don't want you to touch me, and yet I want to be close to you, but I want to give you sex, but I want to have sex with you, but I don't, all this conflicting kind of stuff. But again, kind of go back to who you are, and then I can almost guarantee you that there is a way that you guys can be intimate physically and it still be comfortable and pleasurable, because boy, who wants to be in pain when you're in a sexual vulnerable situation? And neither one of you want that. I'm quite sure about that. So give it a try.
I guess this will be the last question. Can ADD affect or aggravate ED?
It's ED meaning erectile dysfunction.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, potentially it can, because, good sexual arousal, I think, is really it's a matter of kind of timing and attention, in the sense of, going from lower states of arousal to higher, and, finally kind of, plateauing and reaching orgasm and then coming back down again. And that requires some good attention. So, I think that there's a direct, possibly, and then an indirect effect on ADHD and erectile dysfunction, or, the equivalent in women, is that if it's harder to just sort of quiet your mind and focus on the experience, then obviously your arousal level is going to go down because it's hard to be, sexually interested when you're thinking about like, oh, did I mail that form out today that I was supposed to mail? Because that's definitely going to be a buzzkill or an erection killer. Or, the equivalent for women of just kind of their arousal level goes down and they lose lubrication or whatever. So, there's definitely that piece of it that it can be kind of distracting. Now, the other side of it is if you're hyper-focusing, you can wind up with some premature ejaculation or, a quick orgasm for women. So there's, again, you want that sweet spot in the middle. I think that the indirect effect of ADHD is how ADHD is affecting how you see yourself, how it's affecting the relationship, if you feel insecure in the relationship, if you feel kind of guilty and like you can't make sexual requests, that you can't be honest and open with your partner because for fear of how they're going to react, that's going to be a buzzkill as well. So, there are those indirect effects also. But, and obviously all of that, whatever it is that's going on is the thing then that needs to be addressed in order to make it into a better situation.
Exactly. And I thank you, Ari, because that was beautifully said. And the only thing I would add is that medication, especially antidepressant medication, can kill desire like nobody's business, like especially SSRIs. But ADHD and erectile dysfunction are just, they kind of bump into each other, but I don't think there's a real cause and effect except in the ways that Ari just mentioned.
Yeah.
It's been so much fun. I heard the ding dong. It's like, I bet we're done, and it feels like we've just been here a minute.
Well, we will have to end it there. Thanks very much, Linda and Ari. It was good to get the facts about a subject, as I said, not enough experts address. You've given us lots to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.